to talk about improving screening and risk management plans. I know there have been, it's been a topic of conversation in different calls recently, as unfortunately there have been some incidents that have come up. So just to show you what we're going to cover today, we are going to review the elements of effective practice and look at some effective screening tools, and then look at risk management systems, and looking kind of broadly about what's effective about a risk management plan, and reminding you about what is required for the state too for certification. So here are the benchmarks for mentor screening. And I will say that just across the board, since risk management was a priority coming out of the state legislature years ago, unfortunately, because of some incidents that happened on the national level, not that we haven't had unfortunate situations in Iowa as well, but due to that, I think that our programs are pretty strong with their policies and procedures, and I think it's always about implementation and consistent implementation across staff and across you know, all situations. So just having established criteria for accepting mentors, that they complete a written application, that you conduct face-to-face interviews, and that you can conduct comprehensive criminal background check. So enhancements here would be about reference checks with multiple adults who know the applicant, agreeing in writing to the commitment, of course, and that they agree in writing to the length of the commitment, and then to the weekly or whatever the regular meetings are going to be. The mentee screening benchmarks, that you have established criteria for accepting youth into the program, and that there's an application for the parents or guardian and the permission, and that they agree in writing to the commitment. Also that they agree that the frequency of the meetings as well. Tony, can you let folks in from the waiting room? I can't see that they're not in.
I can't either. I'm looking in the chat and looking at my participants, and it is not showing me that I can do that.
Yeah, I'm not seeing that she's waiting. Sorry. So some mentor enhancements are national fingerprint checks, which obviously would be best practice. And I know that that is not the requirement that the state has made, but I know that some programs do choose to use that, and it's fairly accessible through like local copy centers to use the fingerprint check. Conducting home visits, which most of our programs that have community-based programs do as well. Background checks on other adults living in the home, again, is common practice when it's a community-based program. Whatever your guidelines are going to be for contact on the summer months, if it's just a school-based programs. It says programs that utilize adult mentors prioritize accepting mentors that are above college age, and that is an enhancement. I know some of you live in college towns, and college students can be really great mentors too. And just knowing, I know that you have other protocols in place to, you know, to screen them carefully too, to make sure that they're a suitable match for the program, and using evidence-based tools and practices to identify individuals who had attitudes and beliefs that support safe and effective mentoring relationships. Mentee enhancements are completing an application and that they provide written assent agreeing to participate in their mentoring program. So I just want to acknowledge too, we're talking today about screening. We are really talking about screening for safety. Today, we're talking mostly about safety. Obviously, when you're screening both your mentors and your mentees, you're also screening for the suitability and if they're a good match for being a participant in your program. But our focus today is really about the screening for safety. So this is where I want to pause and hear from you about your program's screening practices, and not that you'll go through your entire protocol, but perhaps pick out one of your practices, and maybe it's that you include one of the enhancements. And also if you wanted to share, if it comes to mind too, that where you might have some blind spots. I'm going to flip ahead a little bit to show you the screening process and just remind you that we do screening throughout the whole span of mentoring match. It's not just on onboarding, but a lot of these are pre-match, the orientation, application, formal interview, background check, interpreting the results of those background checks. If you have any additional screening mechanisms, pre-match training, moving towards the match, and then match supervision. So I'm just going to leave this up as we go through attendees. If you just want to do a quick introduction, and then if you want to tell us about what you think is a strength of your screening process that perhaps maybe is unique or, an enhancement, or if you are concerned about where you think you might have a blind spot or an issue that might have come up. So either or both of those. So I think it'd be easiest if I could just go through the list and call on folks if you're okay with that. And first on my list comes up is Annie.
Awesome. So yeah, Annie Steffen from Mentor to Butte. The things that we see with our screening, a lot of it is geared toward trying to prevent white saviorism, both in our application, interview, and then the training, pre-match training. As far as background checks, we do pretty well at finding people through Google, and Iowa Courts Online is fantastic for a lot of those things. For background screening, yeah, just being able to use all the resources that are available that are not super expensive as well is very helpful. We do use, oh my gosh, I can't even remember. We use Sing for one of them, but there's the national site, and I cannot remember it off the top of my head. But yeah, and that's, I think it's like $21 is what we have for running background checks. So getting a lot of the other things off of sites that are free access or something like that is much better. Very thankful that Sing now does the DHS checks, and we don't actually have to do that separately because faxing DHS was never that much fun. Some blind spots, we've had some issues with we've had an issue that I can think of off the top of my head where a mentor started dating the mentee's parent, which is something that, I mean, it wasn't something that was going in at the very beginning, but it was something where it was like, that's very weird that you learn later. So kind of having that community ear of what's going on right now with the mentors and mentees, that would be more something important to have.
Well, that is certainly interesting, Annie. Not boundary. You really thought about getting over involved or boundaries. You don't really think about the the mentor and the mentee's parents. So super interesting. And thanks for mentioning like social media check too, because that's certainly an enhancement. I know a lot of programs are look at too in screening. So thanks. Lynn.
Yeah.
We actually do quite a few background checks, but we have layered background checks. So we do a local, a state, and a national, so that we're, if someone is, for example, out in Montana and commits a crime or wherever else in the country, that's not going to show up on a state or a local background check. So that's why we do the layered bit. What we pay for, we do a social security number verification, and we do a national criminal history check, which those two cost us together like $2.10. And then Department of Criminal Investigation would be Iowa State DCI, and that one cost us $15. But the rest of them actually are free. We also do besides our criminal history check, we actually do check with social media, and have some parameters around that kind of help us with what it is we're looking for. And then the other thing that might look somewhat different is that we do check with if they have been involved in some sort of other kids activities. You know, have they been a coach for Little League, or a Boy Scout leader, or a Girl Scout leader, or those kinds of things, that where they've been in contact and working with kids. Ask for a reference from there, so that gives you some idea of that reference will give you some idea on how they interact with kids, and if there's been some kind of questions in the past. But for the most part, we follow this very much, and very much I trust the process of what we do from start to finish here, and yet to the point of saying that we're going to accept them, and yet I still trust the gut instinct about that person as well. So I know we've had some unusual people that have come in and requested an application that, after talking with them a while, raise a few red flags, and I still hand them an application. I write their name down. Very grateful, but those have not ever returned their application. But knowing that that I had some red flags at the moment that they came in and were speaking with us, you know, the possibility of when you ask them, if, you know, you just say, well, one of those things about the interview process, it gives us an opportunity for you to tell us if you have an age group of kids you like to work with, or if you're going to be school-based, if there's a building that you really like. And one person was very specific about a 12-year-old boy. Okay, that's too much. And then wanted to give me a hug when he left. No, it does not have a sense of boundaries. Very questioning, and I didn't have just red flags. I had fireworks going off in my head as to too many kinds of things that did not feel right about that conversation that I had with him for about a half an hour. And so thankfully never came back in, but he would not have made it through our screening process. One other thing we do is that every 3 years we redo those background checks. So we're keeping up to date. There you go. Thanks,
Lynn. And yes, I think most of you probably do take advantage of the DCI checks, or saying you're calling them through the Iowa Department of Public Safety, and just have to remind you that that is because you are an IMPM member, so you're considered a state program that way, so you have that accessibility for the $15 fee for that reduced fee, or else you wouldn't even have access to that. So that's just another benefit of being part of the IMP. It's also, I know we looked at other things we'd like to do to streamline that background process, and we thought we were making some process, and we looked into that. That's been a few years ago now too, and unfortunately there was some personnel change and that kind of went away, but that doesn't mean that doesn't come up. It doesn't come up and won't be addressed again to try to do some things at the state level again. So we'll go on to Karen, and I think Anna's on as well if you guys want to talk about Everybody Wins.
Okay, I guess I'll start. We do the state background check and things like that. But what I find is one of the most successful things is just when I'm talking to the people when I do run the background check, just to see, like, get a feeling for like who they are, and if they are a good fit. Thankfully, the majority of the mentors have, like, you know, like, not raised red flags, but I have had one or two, but but thankfully, and also when we do the pre-match training, I do like some question answer during that and just get a sense of like what they think mentoring is all about, and like just to make sure that they have the right motivations.
Great, thanks, Anna. Karen, anything else you wanted to add?
I was just going to add, because we are a school-based program and it's kind of scheduled, we have match supervision ongoing. So every time the mentors are meeting with the students, we have staff connected. So if anything came up, we'll definitely have that covered.
Yeah, great, because obviously that's the last step on there too, is the ongoing match supervision too. And yeah, when you're site-based and you can make those observations weekly, that's an added level. Thanks. Felicia.
Hello, everyone. I'm gonna apologize. We're back to having a little person at home.
I've been disappointed if he wasn't there.
He wasn't feeling well, so we went to the doctor and we're back. We're doing everything that everyone else has been saying. I will say the one thing that we're implementing for the community-based program that we're starting up is we are doing the fingerprinting. So that has been a little bit of a learning curve, and getting those fingers, we're rolling them ourselves like in-house. So getting the supplies, and the one thing that we have that to support our program is an HR department. And so they run all of our background checks for us and give us the results. And so that's really nice. We also do a vehicle record check for the community-based side of things. And something else that wasn't mentioned is we do have high school students that serve as mentors, and a while back we asked for a letter of like a full letter of reference, and that was challenging to get back from teachers and coaches, so we kind of switched that into a recommendation form. So it's basically people from the school, vouching for this student that they will be a great mentor, and we also ask references of them as well. So that's it for me.
Great. Yeah, thanks for mentioning that additional screening about driving records, which I know a lot of community-based programs do. And then also if you have mentors under 18, definitely, yeah, reference checks are best practice too. So great. Jessica Davenport.
Oops. Sorry about that. Well, yeah, I have Andrea too.
Hello, Andrea.
So for ours, I think we're pretty happy for the most part with our screening process. We do background checks, we do like the interview process, we have in like the training part also, we have we go over risk management with our mentors. So, we say, don't go into a bathroom by, just like safety things by yourself with the mentees. We
do a home full tour.
Oh, yes, a home tour. We do, and of course I had them all going in my head, and then listening to other people, just in one ear, not the other, with my ideas. But yeah, it was pretty good. But listening, I really like the social media check that was mentioned before. That's something that we don't do, and we probably should do, and add that to be part of our screening process.
Especially with our high school mentors and everything.
Yeah, and then and we ask for references also. That's another thing we do.
Right.
That's
yeah,
about it.
You can learn a lot from social media, can't you?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Jessica Prazak.
Hello. I think I'm kind of on the same as everyone else. The personal references, saying background check. If they've lived out of state, we do one source background check. It's out of Omaha. The National Sex Offender Registry Then the interview, we were just talking on our board. We have a screening form we do like up front with them that they have to sign off on before we run the checks. And our board was talking about some of the language. I just had someone apply to be a mentor and then found out like she didn't tell me she was on probation. So we thought maybe we'd add that to the screening form right up front, saying it can't, like this volunteer opportunity cannot be used for community service. And then our board also was discussing, right now we have you ever been arrested or convicted of the following crimes? And there's kind of a list. Like one of our board members thought we should take out arrested and just convicted, but we have the county sheriff is our chairperson, and he recommended that we leave it as is because he explained there's some really good lawyers out there. So it'd be helpful to, if they've been arrested or convicted. So
Yeah,
and then
thanks. Oh, go ahead, Jessica. I'm sorry.
Oh, I would say we have peer mentors too, and for them, at one of the schools we have, there's actual a JCO there, so they have access to their juvenile record. So if they apply, they kind of do their own search and they just give a recommendation if they would be a good candidate to be a mentor. So.
Great, thanks. Yeah, and thanks for including some of those specifics. I know we only have a couple people to go and, you're kind of running out of things that might be different, but Kathy and John, you might have some particular questions you ask people that, and on either the application or, reference checks, if that's something helpful for you to share. And I really just want to remind you too, when you talk about being arrested and convicted, we know that a large majority of crimes against children go unpunished, and even often they're not even charged in the first place. We know how difficult it is for a young person to speak up and to be believed. So we know that a lot of these are not crimes that will be on people's records either. So I know all of you recognize that the background checks are not the end all be all by any means. So that's why we have all these other processes in place. So, John, do you have anything else to add? So, John, oh, there you go. You're unmuted now.
Hello, sorry, I was wrapping up a conversation with another coworker. No, our stuff looks very similar to what everybody else is doing for our screenings between seeing background checks, driving history checks, since our mentors can drive. I think one area that I'm focused on trying to figure out a little better this year is just what we do for training with our mentors. It was formerly designed as kind of like a group get together as mentors are onboarding, but I've just found that doesn't really work because people are kind of staggering in, so it doesn't really work to have a big group discussion kind of thing. So just figuring out how to have a meaningful kind of one-on-one option for mentors to go through our handbook, our training handbook outside of our onboarding materials. Apart from that, I would say that's the biggest change that I'd like to make this year, is just kind of figuring out a stronger method for that additional training that we do.
Okay. And I knew the one thing that you did mention, and I think Jessica was kind of getting at it too, is that you ask if you're under the supervision of corrections too. So that, Jessica, you asked, like, is this for community service? But I think, John, you asked that if they're under supervision as well. So kind of gives you some other insight about their criminal background. Yeah,
I think one other thing, it's not in our handbook that we need to do this when people apply, but I have for, like, as mentors come in, I usually just do the old Google search and see, like, does anything kind of crazy come up? And that did turn out to be fairly useful for a couple different people for various reasons. But we had somebody like reach out who was a DJ and or they did music production, and they're like, oh yeah, I'd love to mentor this kid. And like the first post on their Facebook page, like on their business page, was them like smoking some unknown substance with like a quote from a musician above it talking about what they might be smoking. So I was like, Okay, I don't think this will work since we are trying to discourage these activities. So it wasn't stated like that to the mentor, but I found that useful a couple times anyways, just kind of glancing to see what we could find.
Right, yeah, thanks. Kathy?
Yeah, like you said, we do a lot of what other people do. I loved, though, that Lynn reminded us to listen to our gut, because that is so very, very important. And one thing, we use Mentors for a Day quite a bit. And when we were working on our policies and procedures manual, we discovered that we didn't have any written policies for our Mentors for a Day, their eligibility, their screening, or anything like that. And those are the folks that help out at events and are assigned a child to be there. And so we just on Tuesday got all of our, because each of our counties has an advisory council, and they've all agreed and signed off on that what we developed was useful, helpful, and said the way that we want it to be. So that's always a good feeling when you've got the written criteria, and it's helped us a few times with mentors when we've had that written criteria to say, hey, you know, the reason you're not eligible is because of 2B, you know, and then they can read it and it's not a subjective type of thing. Anyway, that's what I had to share.
Yeah, great reminder though about just, you know, the whole screening process for all of your volunteers too, whether it's like you said, the Mentor for a Day or, you know, entering a long-term mentoring relationship. And I think you brought up the question prior, Kathy, when we were discussing on the other call. One of the reference check questions you asked is, I think it was you that said, you asked them, would you hire them again? Because we know that we're talking to employers, they're kind of guarded and they have to be careful about what they can say. But that's a really good question. Would you hire them again? And I think the other thing too is asking someone if you trust the person with their own child. You know, that's a very telling question as well. We've talked about gut. I wanted to raise that up too as well when we do the more in-depth safe practices for screening. We talk a lot about informed intuition, and that's what we're talking about with your gut feeling. But it is intuition and it is informed. It's based on some of your knowledge, and then you get that feeling about it, and that is throughout the process. You know, as you go through training, you might see some red flags too about their behavior. We'll talk about some red flags a little bit later. And also just want to bring up the, remind us that that adults that want to prey on children, they're looking to groom not only the child, but the family and also the program. And there is sometimes a very fine line with what makes a really good mentor and just crossing that line to like that they're grooming you and kind of fooling you to getting access to a young person. And while there is lower risk at a site or school-based program, a young person can be groomed at that program and be making arrangements to meet outside of the program too. So just that awareness about the grooming process, which is quite frightening. Did anyone else have any other comments about good questions they ask? Some things came up either in the application or in reference checks or referrals, that any other questions they wanted to ask that are very helpful?
Hi, this is Andy again. Sorry, I took two different accounts on. But I did want to add something that came to mind when we were talking about it. We also do a Google search of their the email address, which is just something that Kaylin had heard as far as like FBI background checks, that that's something they do. So that was something that just came to mind. That it's, again, free, so it's pretty easy to do that way.
And so that's, I do think you've mentioned that before, but then you'd find just things that are associated with that account, obviously. So that could be super telling as well.
Exactly, and that, especially like if it's any sort of issue with like dark web or anything like that, that would be more likely to come up. But most often it's whatever their email company, or it basically says nothing. So, yeah, but just in case.
Thanks, Annie. Anything else that you wanted to add, anyone? Okay, just reminders, and I think we've addressed probably most of these already. Why are we screening? And obviously, it's about safety, and actually, the green one is talking about the suitability for the program too. So just want to cover some red flags that may come up throughout the process. Lack of balance refers to a lack of peer relationships. Extreme behavior. Either sometimes you had people that are really over eager to cooperate, or they're impatient with the screening process. They might check in with you a lot about, how they're progressing with getting enrolled in the program. Again, an eager mentor could be a really stellar mentor, and they really are eager to get started. So, any one of these red flags doesn't mean that, that they're necessarily ruled out. It's just something to pay attention to, and in the balance with everything else that you're seeing too. Inappropriate behavior could be really vague about how they heard about the program, concerned about being rejected, concerned about the mentee really liking them, really inappropriate as far as like worried about what that relationship is really going to be about. Over involvement with children kind of goes along with the under involvement with adults. If all of their activities are about being with young people, and if they seem to lack, again, adult relationships or have any activities that involve adults as well. Again, someone who coaches Little League and might be involved in, youth programs at their church, they could be the greatest mentor too. That doesn't mean because they volunteer a lot with other youth serving programs means they're a bad mentor. But if to balance it out, they don't have any other adult relationships, that might be questionable too. And that'd be something you just wanted to explore some more. So other red flags would be some unhealthy attitudes, like when they act like children are adults. They talk about, they might talk about a young, I'm going to say it's particular, like a young a girl as a woman, so they're not really addressing or looking at those boundaries that this is a young person, this is a child that they're mentoring. Problematic background would be if they have some substance abuse issues, issues volunteering at other youth serving organizations, which was brought up, and history of abuse themselves. Now, that doesn't mean that they are going to be an abuser, but just those could be some red flags, and just wanted that they could be open and discuss those things too. And the way that they can talk about them can be really telling. Controlling the process is that, and we talked about that too. If they just really want, like, I want to do this next, I want to move to the next phase, and can we do the training? And even in the training, if they're controlling about that and like kind of not really engaging or don't feel like they're taking it seriously too, can be telling. Problematic personal interest, if they're really interested in long-term unsupervised activities, such as that it's all about like they want to go camping, do overnight things, really over interested in photography too, which again, there's nothing wrong with camping or photography, but just in context and what that might mean with being with young people, or if they're just really very vague about they like to just hang out, like what does that really mean? Also, if they're focusing on their own personal needs, someone mentioned an example of that too, if they're very specific about the type of youth that they wanted. And then some of this also would get into more just suitability. If they've had a recent major life change, then maybe that's just not a good time for them. If they're just trying to fill a personal void, then maybe that's more about their need than to be an asset to the mentoring program. Any other thoughts on red flags or things that came up, situations? I think several of you mentioned some of these situations, some red flags you'd seen. The next slide is challenges to agencies to, with the risk management, with screening practices. And I realize these are probably not showing up very large on your screen. I will obviously will be sending out the slides. So some is denial. I don't think that we're in denial about the importance of proper screening. We did talk about 90%. This says unreported incidents, that often crimes against children are not reported. Sometimes there's pressure to conceal, you don't want this out in the public about what's going on, if there's a situation with your program. No mandated standards. There are a variety of, and I think that's another one of these, there's a variety of standards, patchwork of state and federal statutes. And we have standards at the state level. There are standards with Mentor National. Some of you have standards with your organization, your umbrella organization, or your national organization as well. Inconsistencies across agencies. So at least we do have some consistency as part of being this part of this certified by the state agency. Errors in databases. We know those things can happen. And we know that clearance through criminal screening process might not indicate safety. And unfortunately, for some law enforcement agencies, prosecuting these crimes is not a high priority. I won't say that that's true across the board, and it's just know that it is challenging. So the overarching part about this is, what does your risk management plan look like? So what is risk management? We know with youth serving programs, mentoring, it's a high risk endeavor because of the nature of the program. They're spending unsupervised time alone with the young person. We're asking them to develop a close relationship, and also oftentimes we're serving vulnerable youth. We talked a lot about mentoring in site-based and school-based program has a lower risk, obviously. And sometimes we serve maybe a lower risk population. Maybe we aren't targeting such vulnerable youth. But it's impossible to operate a mentor program that's completely free of risk, just because of the nature of youth mentoring. But do we think that it's worth the risk? Yes, and that's why we're trying to manage all the risks that are out there. So we're talking about physical danger to participants, as well as emotional risks associated with this intimate relationship, and other issues that might create liability for the mentoring program. So the broad things are the physical and emotional, but just trying to think of all the risks. So I liked this, looking at this risk management process to assess your overall risk level based on some of the things we talked about, the population, the missionary program, and the program structure. And this kind of goes back to all of those things about your mentor and mentee eligibility, looking at the criteria, how well you put that out there for both mentors and mentees so that they're a good fit for the program. And structure, how they meet, and the boundaries of those meetings. Anticipate all the risks based on some of those same factors, and strategize to reduce those risks at every phase of the program. And we looked at that outline about the different phases of the mentoring relationship. Prepare your board members, program staff, volunteers, youth, and parents for issues that may arise and risks to be aware of. We kind of glossed over a little bit when we talked about training. I think we're really thinking about training the mentors, but obviously this is something that we cover when we're training the mentees and their families too, and talking about boundaries and about safe meetings. And so they are aware of all of the risk management things that you have in place too for the program. They want to feel like their child is going to be safe in this program, but you also want them to be aware, look, so they know, and they're thinking if they see some red flags too, and that they're reporting that to you. Troubleshoot problems when they're still manageable, and that goes to this onboarding process, and even before they might be in the program, but also the monitoring of the match as it goes along. Minimize damage, of course, and limit liability when a risk becomes a crisis or a liability. So just reminder about the requirements for a risk management plan for the state and for certification, that there has to be training for mentors and the mentees and the family that includes information about appropriate boundaries of a relationship. And so that involves think about, physical contact, definitely. How they would report to the program, and that they have the ability to report to a law enforcement and or DHS if they feel like there is some violation of those boundaries. And also talking about what safe meeting places are and what that looks like. I know you go into a lot more about safety too, as far as activities that can be, the activities that are allowed, as far as like, it shouldn't be drinking or using drugs, or if they're, using weapons of any kind. And also that I know you have boundaries around social media and their involvement with young people on social media and outside of the program when they're in the mentoring match. And then for background checks, the state criminal history check is required, and the National Sex Offender Registry, that free online check, is required. Does anyone have questions just about what is required for the state with the risk management plan?
I guess I have a question related to, like, we go over a document with the mentees and the parents and the mentors at their training that's about safety and body safety specifically. And sometimes that's pretty awkward when you're meeting them the very first time and they don't know much about your program, but I always preface it with, our number one thing that's really important is that your child feels safe and that you feel safe as a young person. But just wondering, I don't see that particularly, because there's another thing that we talk about, we're safe meeting places, but I don't see anything like that for the requirements.
So that's encompassed in appropriate boundaries, that physical boundaries. Yeah.
Okay, because we also talk about touching and that kind of stuff, but not in that document. So I know when we did the risk management plan many years ago, everybody had to have something that they shared that was like a booklet or some kind of something. And like I said, us using that sometimes feels very, very awkward. So maybe I'll just visit with you more about that.
Yeah, because I think, I don't know that it's actually, the content needs to be shared. I don't know that necessarily there has to be a booklet of that, but the content needs to be shared. And I appreciate what you're saying. And maybe there's a different way we can talk about that more. The way you talk about it, when you're onboarding them and just making them aware. And I think it's important that you have them sign that you've talked about those things too. That's just another way to, cover the program, that, you are taking this, that you're looking at your risk. But then maybe that's sharing that, maybe you share that booklet at a next step of that, Kathy, or something like that. But we can talk further about that.
Thank you.
So specifically, just wanted to share these steps about preventing child sex abuse. I think we have some good partners with Prevent Child Abuse Iowa too in this state if you're looking for some more resources. But I do think that I think most of you look at all of these things. Again, it's looking at, we have these policies and procedures, but how are they actually implemented? And, is that with integrity across all staff and all programs and in all situations too, that it's not because we think we know this person that maybe we cut corners on this mentor and fast track them or anything like that. And the last one is strengthening human resources, is just, again, looking at internally, like how do we do that with staff, with onboarding them and making sure that they're aware of all these policies as well. So some resources to share. This mentoring best practices and screening is a bunch of resources in there. So I encourage you to just click on that and check out that link. And then Centers for Disease Control and Prevention just has some of those. And they shared some of the information that was on some of the previous slides too. So I encourage you to check out a couple of those resources if you're looking to go into this in more depth. I think something that's come up, we've talked about in other conversations too, is that we share some information with a mentor and a mentee when they first launch the match, and often that's in maybe elementary school, and that the young person then grows and develops through middle school and high school, and that the conversations and the type of about safety and their and if there'd be any kind of a sexual abuse or that would change as the young person develops. And so how do we address that with mentors and mentees? And it seems like if we would make markers about if it's a transition year in school, that might be a good time to readdress that, and that you're sharing some content with mentors at that time. Like, these are some things that we should be talking about, the conversations with the relationships with friends and with caring adults, other caring adults in their life, and what those boundaries look like for them too. So I know that is a concern for programs, and I think we just really do need to be mindful that we need to share some ongoing information with mentors as these matches progress and those relationships look different for young people as they develop. And I know some of you have great community partners that are doing presentations for you. Some programs have just implemented calls kind of like this, or like our coffee chats with mentors a couple of times a year, and they're implementing some information like that on those calls too, just where people can ask questions too, and sharing information about how they're addressing that with mentors, with their mentees as those things might come up. Does anyone have a question for the group or anything else that they'd like to talk about?